I came home on a Wednesday afternoon in October to find my irrigation control panel ripped off the wall of my pump house, the wiring cut, and 47 feet of Schedule 40 PVC pipe stacked in my driveway with a violation notice zip-tied to the top of the pile. 32 years of designing water systems for the state of California, and I was staring at a $47,000 installation that some HOA president with a clipboard had decided didn't belong on my own property. He had no idea what he'd just turned off. My name is Raymond Calloway. Most people call me Ray. I'm 58 years old, and I spent the better part of my adult life as a licensed professional engineer with the California Department of Water Resources, specializing in hydraulic systems and groundwater management across the Central Valley. PE license number C47291. I've got 2 published papers in the Journal of Water Resources Planning and Management, and enough field hours to know exactly what happens when you interrupt a water system without understanding what it's connected to. I retired from DWR at 55, not because I had to, but because I'd finally saved enough to do what my father never could. I bought land. The property is 3 acres in Sierra Vista Estates, an unincorporated community in Madera County, California, about 11 miles east of the city of Madera on Highway 145. From my back porch on a clear morning, you can see the Sierra Nevada laid out across the eastern horizon like a promise someone made a long time ago and actually kept. The land sits at about 450 feet elevation, right at the transition zone where the flat valley floor starts to wrinkle into the lower foothills, and the soil is that red-brown color that tells you the iron content is high and the drainage is good. I knew what I had the first time I walked it. My father, Manuel Calloway, was a farm worker his entire life. He came up from Oaxaca in 1962, met my mother in Fresno, and spent 40 years bent over other people's crops in this same valley. He died in 2003, owning nothing but a 1991 Ford pickup and a modest savings account he'd been building for decades. He never complained. But I watched him watch the landowners, the ranchers, the men who could walk their own acres without asking permission from anyone. I watched him with something that wasn't quite envy. More like recognition of a distance he understood would never close for him. When I was 19 years old, I promised myself I'd close that distance. The 3 acres in Madera County was me keeping that promise. Every morning I walked those acres, I was walking them for both of us. I moved to Sierra Vista Estates in the spring of 2019. Linda, my wife of 31 years, a retired elementary school teacher from Clovis Unified, took to the property the way I knew she would. She started a kitchen garden the first year, planted a mulberry tree along the south fence line, made the place into a home with the same methodical care she brought to everything. Our son Derek lives in Sacramento. He comes down a few times a year. There's always a guest room ready. In my first year on the property, I designed and installed what I'd been planning in my head for 15 years. A comprehensive drip irrigation system fed by a dedicated pump house on the eastern edge of my parcel. 47 feet of Schedule 40 PVC mainline, branching into about 340 feet of quarter-inch drip tubing across my fruit trees, vegetable beds, and native grass areas along the property's 2 seasonal drainage channels. The system included a pressure-reducing valve set to 28 psi, a 200 mesh filtration housing, and an automated controller with soil moisture sensors I wired myself. Total installation cost came to $47,200, not counting the labor, which was mine. I pulled every permit from Madera County, got the work inspected, filed everything properly. 32 years in state government will do that to you. The pump house itself was a 12 by 16-foot structure I built over 3 months, poured concrete foundations, stick-framed walls, standing seam metal roof, number 2 Douglas fir framing, a 240-volt circuit from my main panel, proper weatherproof disconnects, and a GFCI breaker. Everything to code, everything permitted. Setback 22 feet from the property line, within all county setback requirements. I had the survey stakes to prove it. Sierra Vista Estates was developed in 1987 by Valley Heritage Properties. There are 112 homes in the subdivision, most on 1 to 5 acre parcels. It's the kind of place where people have horses or chickens, and nobody finds that unusual. The roads are county-maintained, the parcel's large enough that you're not in your neighbor's pocket. For the first 3 years I was there, it was exactly what I'd worked my whole life for. The HOA had existed since 1987, but had been what these things are supposed to be, a quiet administrative body handling common area maintenance and sending out maybe 2 pieces of mail a year. Annual dues were $420. Nobody paid much attention to it. That changed when Gerald Prentice became president. Gerald moved to Sierra Vista Estates in 2020. Bought a 4-acre property on the north end of the subdivision, and within 18 months got himself elected HOA president by running on a platform of improving community standards and protecting property values. He was 64 years old, a retired marketing vice president from Los Angeles who'd spent his career selling people things they didn't need. He drove a white 2021 Lexus RX 350. He kept cleaner than most operating rooms, wore pressed khakis and polo shirts even on weekends, and had the kind of confident smile that works well in conference rooms and very badly in conversations with people who actually know something. I met Gerald for the first time at the annual HOA meeting in February 2021. He gave a 15-minute presentation with printed slides about his vision for elevating the Sierra Vista Estates brand, which told me everything I needed to know. He was the kind of man who looked at a community of rural landowners in the Central Valley foothills and saw a marketing problem. I shook his hand, told Linda on the way home that I hoped he'd find a hobby, and went back to my life. The first letter arrived in July 2021. Official HOA letterhead, signed by Gerald Prentice, President, informing me that I had installed unapproved structures and landscaping features in violation of Section 7, 3B of the CCNRs, which governed exterior modifications visible from common areas or adjacent parcels. The violation cited was my pump house. I read Section 7, 3B carefully. It concerned modifications to the exterior of the primary residential structure. My pump house was a separate outbuilding on a 4.3-acre property, screened by a row of Italian cypress along the east boundary. I wrote a 1-page response, cited the relevant county permit documentation, mailed it certified mail. I got a receipt. I heard nothing back. The second letter came in September 2021, more aggressive. It cited the pump house again, added a violation for the irrigation trenching work, and levied a preliminary fine of $350. It requested I schedule a property review meeting within 30 days. I called the HOA's listed number and got voicemail. I called again, nothing. I drove to the property management company's office in Madera. The woman at the desk told me to submit my concerns in writing. I submitted them in writing, certified mail, return receipt requested. In October, I attended the monthly HOA board meeting at the Madera County Library branch off 5th Street, 9 people total, including 5 board members. When public comment opened, I walked through my position methodically: permitted structures, correct setbacks, compliant installation, documented inspections. Gerald listened with his hands folded and that smile that never touched his eyes. When I finished, he thanked me for my comments and said the board would take them under advisement. Tom Briggs, a board member who ran a small orchard on the subdivision's south end and had lived in Sierra Vista Estates for 16 years, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He voted against the enforcement motion. He was outvoted 4-1. The $350 fine was upheld. A second fine of $600 added for failure to remediate. I wrote the checks because the total was less than a day's legal consultation, and I still believed this was a misunderstanding. I was wrong about what it was. The third letter, in January 2022, informed me that the board had conducted an independent review and determined my pump house may constitute an unpermitted structure, and my irrigation system raises concerns regarding community aesthetic standards. It demanded full documentation within 30 days or further fines of $200 per week. I sent them every permit, every inspection report, every county approval. 14 documents organized chronologically with a cover letter citing specific county code sections. Gerald sent back a form acknowledgement. The fines continued. By March 2022, I'd paid $2,400. I didn't know yet that Gerald had been making calls to contractors about removing an unapproved installation from a residential property. I found out on that Wednesday in October when I came home to a gutted pump house and a driveway full of pipe. I stood there a long time before I moved. The October air had that particular Central Valley quality, warm still, with dryness carrying smoke from distant fires and the smell of turning leaves from the orchards bordering the subdivision to the south. I looked at what had been done and felt something move through me that wasn't quite anger. Anger is hot. This was cold. The kind of clarity you get when something crosses a line so far past anything you'd imagined that your brain goes very quiet and very focused. The violation notice zip-tied to the pipe stack was a single page. The HOA had exercised its authority under Section 12, 4 of the CC&Rs to abate a nuisance and unapproved installation at my property. The abatement costs of $1,850 had been assessed against my account. I had 30 days to confirm the property was now in compliance. Signed by Gerald Prentice, President. I went inside. I called Linda, who was at her book club in Madeira. She heard something in my voice and came home. She stood in the driveway looking at the pump house and then looked at me. So what are we going to do? Not should we fight this. Not maybe we should talk to them first. She knew me well enough to understand the question was only about how, not whether. I'm going to find out exactly what's on this property, I said. Every document ever recorded, every easement, every survey, every transfer. She nodded once. I'll make coffee. I sat at my desk until 3 in the morning going through every document I had on the property, the title report from the 2019 purchase, the preliminary title policy, the grant deed, the subdivision plat I'd downloaded years ago but never studied in detail. The plat was a slightly blurry reduced copy from the title company. Even in that form, I could see references along the eastern portion of my parcel to what looked like utility notations. The print was too small to read. The original would be at Madera County. At 7 the next morning, I drove into Madera. The Madera County Clerk Recorder's office occupies the ground floor of the courthouse on Yosemite Avenue, a limestone building processing public records since 1893. The heating system sounds like something from an industrial ship, knocking and hissing as the pipes expand in morning cold. The smell inside is old paper and floor wax and institutional permanence. Harold Manning had worked behind that counter for 37 years. A compact, careful man of 62 with reading glasses perpetually on his forehead and the deliberate movements of someone whose knees made every step a considered decision. He recognized me as I came through the door. Mr. Calloway, don't usually see you on a Thursday morning. Everything all right? Harold, I need to pull every recorded document on my parcel going back to original patent. Surveys, easements, transfers, utility agreements, anything recorded against that property in the history of the subdivision. He raised both eyebrows. That goes back to at least 1987, maybe earlier if the land was in ag use before development. I want it all. He studied me a moment. HOA trouble? Something like that. He pulled a key ring from his belt. Come on back. The vault room was behind the main counter, floor-to-ceiling shelves of bound deed books and metal filing cabinets that had survived 3 county attempts at digitization. The air was colder, drier, with the smell of paper kept in the dark for a very long time. Harold moved through it like a man in his own home. He pulled 3 bound volumes from different shelves with the efficiency of a reference librarian who has memorized where everything lives. We spread them on a wide oak table that had probably been in that room since before either of us was born. The original plat for Sierra Vista Estates, recorded October 14, 1987, was a large-format engineering drawing reduced to fit the deed book, but still 18 inches across. Harold positioned a magnifying sheet over the eastern portion of the subdivision. I leaned in. The notation read, Water Service Easement, 20 feet wide, Lot 7 to Lot 47. See Recorded Instrument, 1987, C Car 4471. My parcel was Lot 23. The easement ran through it on a diagonal from southeast to northwest, but it was the second notation, smaller, in the upper right quadrant where my property's northeast corner was shown, that made me stop breathing. Well, Access and Maintenance Easement. See Recorded Instrument 1962 CR0089. 25 years before the subdivision existed. Harold. Can you pull Instrument 1962 CR0089? He was already moving to a different cabinet. The 1962 volume was thick, its cover worn soft as old leather. He found the instrument number and laid it flat under the magnifying sheet. It was a two-page document titled Grant of Easement and Water Rights Agreement, recorded September 8, 1962, between Chester A. Woodbridge, who had operated a 320-acre cattle ranch on this land before it became Sierra Vista Estates, and the Madera County Water District. The document granted MCWD a permanent, irrevocable easement for well access, maintenance, and operation on a specific portion of the original parcel, described by meets and bounds. I pulled out my phone, opened my own deed's property description, and compared coordinates. The well was on my property, not near it, not adjacent, on it. On the northeast corner, approximately 60 feet from my pump house, there was a county-permitted, deed-recorded water well that had been operating since 1962, and according to Instrument 1987 CR 4471, it served the water distribution system for the entire Sierra Vista Estates subdivision, every house, all 112 of them, including Gerald Prentice's. Harold Manning was watching me with the expression of a man who has seen people have realizations in his vault room before and knows to let them happen without comment. Harold, can I get copies of everything? The original plat, both easement instruments, any recorded maintenance agreements associated with this well? Ready in 40 minutes. I sat in a plastic chair in the public area and drank the last of my coffee, which had gone cold. I thought about Chester Woodbridge and his cattle ranch. I thought about the developer who'd platted Sierra Vista Estates in 1987, careful enough to carry the easement for Ward. I thought about the CCNRs written that same year that I hadn't looked at carefully enough. I thought about Gerald Prentice and his Lexus RX, calling contractors, making decisions about infrastructure he didn't understand, on property he didn't own. I thought about California Water Code Section 1200 and what it says about interference with recorded water rights. Harold came out with a manila envelope and a receipt for $47 in copying fees. That afternoon I called Carla Mendez. Carla was a water rights attorney in Fresno who I'd crossed professional paths with twice during my DWR career, once during a Fresno Irrigation District dispute in 2008 and once during a groundwater sustainability plan negotiation in 2015. She was 51, small and precise, with a corner office on Fulton Street full of California Water Code volumes and survey maps, and the organized intensity of someone who has won arguments in rooms full of engineers and state bureaucrats. She'd beaten the State Water Resources Control Board in 2 significant cases. I drove to her office the next morning with the manila envelope and the complete CC&R packet. "Tell me what happened," she said, and I did. She didn't interrupt once in 20 minutes. She made notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting so small it looked like engineering specifications. When I finished, she read the easement documents carefully, once fast and once slow, her finger moving along the lines of the 1962 instrument. Then she set them down and looked at me over her reading glasses. "Ray, do you know what a dominant estate is?" "In property law terms, yes. The property that benefits from an easement on a servient estate." "Correct. The 1962 easement designates Madera County Water District as the easement holder. MCWD has the legal right to access, operate, and maintain the well on your property. But look at paragraph 4C. She turned the document toward me. "Grantor, his heirs and assigns, shall maintain unobstructed access to the well facility and shall take no action to interfere with or diminish the water supply provided thereunder. That obligation runs with the land. Every property served by this well has a derivative right to that supply, meaning all 112 homes." Meaning all 112 homes, she set her pen down. "Now tell me about the CCNRs. I turned to Section 4(7), buried in the utility and infrastructure provisions. "No owner, board member, or association representative shall take any action to obstruct, damage, remove, or interfere with any utility infrastructure serving multiple parcels within the subdivision, including but not limited to water supply systems, electrical distribution equipment, or drainage facilities. Violation of this section shall render the acting party personally liable for all resulting damages." Carla read it twice. Then she smiled. It wasn't a large smile, but it was the particular satisfaction of someone handed exactly what they needed. The developer put Section 4(7) in there because they knew about the well, she said. They were protecting their buyers. Gerald Prentice just used the HOA's own governing documents to destroy infrastructure that those same documents say no one is allowed to touch. She leaned back. He violated his own CC under ours when he had your system removed. How many violations are we looking at? She counted on her fingers. Interference with a recorded water easement, potential violation of California Water Code, state jurisdiction, violation of Section 4. 7 of the CC&Rs, direct civil claim against the HOA and potentially Prentice personally. Tortious interference with your property, the destroyed irrigation system, and here's the one that gets everyone's attention. She paused. He didn't just damage your system. The well he's been ignoring is the primary water supply for the subdivision. If anything happens to access to that well, if MCWD can't perform maintenance, if the pump fails and they can't get equipment in, those 112 homes lose water. Gerald Prentice, trying to enforce aesthetic standards, has put himself in a position where he is personally obstructing a county water facility. I sat with that for a moment. What's the play? 2 tracks, simultaneous. First, I draft a formal legal notice to the HOA board and to Prentice personally, citing every violation, demanding restoration of your system at HOA expense, plus your documented damages, rescission of all fines. 30 days to respond. She tapped her pen. Second, I call Madera County Water District. They're going to want to know their easement access is being interfered with by a board that never read the subdivision plat. Will MCWD act? Ray, you spent 32 years with DWR. What does a county water utility do when someone obstructs access to their infrastructure? I nodded. They don't ask twice. They don't ask once. They notify and act. She picked up her pen. I'll also contact the State Water Resources Control Board. Now, one more thing. All 112 homeowners, when they find out their HOA president put their water supply at risk chasing aesthetic violations, what happens? Depends on what they know and when. Then we make sure they find out at the right time. I drove home through the late afternoon Central Valley light, that low gold that turns the orchard rows into something almost luminous. I felt different than I had driving in, not triumphant. It was too early for that, but the cold clarity from 2 days ago had direction now. Over the following 2 weeks, I did what engineers do before a serious engagement. I documented everything. I photographed the pump house interior, the cut wiring, the removed control panel, the stacked PVC. I got a written assessment from a licensed plumbing contractor in Madera who put the restoration cost at $51,400, higher than the original installation due to damage to the underground conduit. I got a formal appraisal from an irrigation systems specialist in Fresno, confirming the $47,000 original value. I organized every piece of HOA correspondence chronologically, tabbed, and indexed. I made 3 copies of everything, one for Carla, one for my files, one in a safety deposit box at Wells Fargo in Madera. I also made calls, informational ones, carefully framed. I called the Madera County Building Department and asked a hypothetical about HOA removal of county-permitted structures. I called Phil Arredondo, a colleague from my DWR years now with the State Water Resources Control Board's District 5 office in Fresno, and had a general conversation about easement interference scenarios. Phil listened carefully and said that if I ever had a specific situation to discuss, his door was open. Meanwhile, something interesting was happening in Sierra Vista Estates. 3 homes on the north end, the end served by the lateral line closest to my property, had been reporting low water pressure for 2 weeks. Madera County Water District had sent a technician out twice, found nothing wrong on the public side, and noted the issue appeared to originate with the well pump. The well pump on my property, the one that had lost its primary power connection when the HOA's contractor cut my wiring. I hadn't reconnected anything deliberately. The pump's secondary monitoring circuit, which was supposed to alert MCWD when the pump dropped below operational parameters, had been damaged in the same process that wrecked my control panel. MCWD's technician hadn't determined the source of the problem because he'd been looking at the wrong end of the system. I knew what was happening. I'd known since the second day. I said nothing to anyone except Carla, who told me to document the MCWD service calls but not to interfere.
"Let them find it," she said. "Their discovery is better than your disclosure right now." The subdivision's Facebook group had been active with posts about the pressure issue. Gerald posted twice, once to say the HOA was monitoring the situation, once to say MCWD was handling it appropriately. Tom Briggs posted a question asking whether the HOA had knowledge of infrastructure issues on private parcels that might be contributing.
Gerald replied that the matter was under HOA review and asked Tom to direct inquiries to the board. Tom called me the third week of November. I could hear his truck engine running. He got to the point inside 30 seconds. "Ray, the water problem. It's connected to what happened at your property, isn't it?" "I can't discuss the details. I've got legal counsel involved." A pause. "The well is on your parcel. I can't confirm or deny anything until the legal process plays out." Another pause. Longer. "Gerald doesn't know. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer it. For what it's worth," Tom said, "I voted against the enforcement action both times. If there's anything you need from me as a board member, documentation, records, anything, you let me know. Stay on the board, Tom. Things are going to be clearer soon." Carla filed the formal notice on November 22nd, a Tuesday. 23 pages plus 14 exhibits, addressed to Gerald Prentice as HOA president, to each board member individually, and to the property management company. It laid out the full scope of what had happened, the recorded easement, the CC&R violations, the damage assessment, the connection between the HOA's actions and the ongoing well pump issues affecting subdivision residents. It cited California Water Code sections 1200 through 1212, Civil Code section 4 through 600, and Madera County Recorded Instruments 1962 CR 0089 and 1987 CR 4471. It demanded $51,400 for system restoration, $2,400 for paid fines, $1,850 for the abatement fee, and $8,500 for legal fees. Total, $64,150. It also demanded a formal written apology, rescission of all violation notices, and immediate repair of the well pump monitoring circuit by a licensed electrical contractor. Response deadline, December 22nd, 30 days. I know Gerald received it because Carla sent it certified mail and we got the return receipt. Tom Briggs told me later that Gerald called an emergency board meeting the evening of November 23rd, the night before Thanksgiving. Gerald walked in with the notice in his hand and the color of old concrete, his voice carrying a quality Tom had never heard in it before. He kept saying it wasn't possible, that the well couldn't be on my property, that someone had gone out and verified the location before the enforcement action. But when Tom pulled up the actual plat on his laptop right there in the meeting, when they looked at the coordinates, everyone in that room watched Gerald understand what he'd done. Madera County Water District sent their own letter 4 days later, addressed to Gerald Prentice as HOA president, informing him that easement access to the water supply well on private parcel APN 029-430-023, my parcel, had been obstructed and monitoring equipment disabled, potentially in violation of the recorded easement agreement. They requested immediate written confirmation that access would be restored, noting that failure to comply within 15 days would require MCWD to seek legal remedy. The letter was signed by the district's operations director. Phil Arredondo had made a call, not officially on my behalf, just a colleague mentioning to a colleague that there might be an issue worth looking into in a certain Madera County subdivision. The subdivision Facebook group became very active. Someone posted the MCWD letter, and the comments ran past 200 before Gerald turned off commenting on his own posts and went quiet entirely. People were asking questions about the water, about the well, about what the HOA had done on Ray Calloway's property, about whether their water supply had been put at risk over a landscaping dispute. Bill Ochoa stopped by my property on a December morning when frost was thick on the grass and the air had the cold, dry clarity of the San Joaquin Valley in winter. Bill was 72, a deliberate man, not given to strong language. His family had dry-farmed almonds in this valley for 3 generations before his father sold the land in the 1990s. He stood in my driveway looking at the gutted pump house and then looked at me. My family watered their cattle from a well that old Woodbridge dug in 1958, he said. That well, he nodded toward the northeast corner of my property. Chester Woodbridge let my grandfather hook a line off it when our well went dry in 1961. My grandfather told me about it every time we drove past this land. He was quiet a moment. Prentice moved here 4 years ago. I know, I said. The people who voted him in, they didn't know about any of this. Most of them didn't. He nodded slowly. You going to take everything or just what's fair? I'm going to take what the law says I'm owed, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. He seemed satisfied with that. Good. Because there are people in this subdivision who made an honest mistake voting for the man. Don't make them pay for his. I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward. Gerald called me directly on December 14th. I was in my workshop, working a dovetail joint on a cabinet I was building for Linda's sewing room. I stood there looking at his number for a second before I picked up. Ray. He'd almost called me Marcus, caught himself. I think we need to talk man to man before this goes further. I set down my chisel. You have my attorney's contact information. I know. Could we just talk? I'd like to explain some things. Gerald, I'm not going to have a conversation outside the legal process. But I'll say this. Everything I've asked for in that notice is exactly what I'm owed, not a dollar more. I'm not interested in destroying you. I'm interested in what's right. A long pause. I didn't know about the well. I know you didn't. I was trying to improve the community. I know what you were trying to do, but intending to do something right doesn't fix what actually happened. I picked up the chisel, talked to my attorney. The board held a special meeting on December 18th. Tom Briggs sent me a brief text afterward. Vote was 4-1. They're going to settle. Gerald resigned. Settlement negotiations ran 4 days, conducted entirely through counsel. The final agreement, executed on December 26th, provided for full payment of $64,150, a formal written apology from the board, signed by all 4 remaining members, acknowledging the enforcement action had been taken in error without proper review of recorded property instruments. Formal rescission of every violation notice issued against my property, and an amendment to the HOA's enforcement procedures requiring that any action affecting structures or systems within 30 feet of any recorded utility easement must first be reviewed by a licensed professional engineer before proceeding. That last provision was Tom Briggs's idea. He told me it was the only way to make sure it couldn't happen to someone else. A licensed contractor came out on January 8th and restored my irrigation system. The main line went back in the same trench. The old bed still stable, and the control panel was replaced with an upgraded unit, including remote monitoring capability. The pump house got a new door with a deadbolt. I was standing in the driveway watching the contractor finish the final connections when Bill Ochoa walked over from his property and stood beside me. Water pressure's been normal for 2 weeks, he said. Good. People talk different about you now. How so? He thought about it the way older rural Californians think about things, not rushing to fill silence with approximate words when precise ones are available. Like you're someone who knew what he was doing when the rest of us weren't paying attention, like Chester Woodbridge. Chester always knew what was on his land. I didn't say anything for a moment. The contractor was torquing the last conduit fitting on the control panel. The January morning was cold and clear, the Sierra Nevada standing in full view along the eastern horizon, white-capped and brilliant against pale winter sky. My father picked crops in this valley his whole life, I said eventually. He never owned an acre. Bill looked at me sideways. And I spent 32 years learning how every water system in this valley works. So when someone came at this land, I knew what it was connected to. Bill was quiet for a long time. Then, your father would have liked knowing that. Gerald Prentice moved out of Sierra Vista Estates in February. He sold his property to a family from Clovis who keep horses and have fit into the subdivision the way it was always meant to work. I don't know where Gerald went, and I find I don't think about it much. What I do think about sometimes is that he wasn't simply arrogant. He was a man who'd lost his professional identity when he retired and needed to feel like he was managing something important. I understand that feeling more than I'd like to admit. Letting go of the kind of identity you've spent a career building is harder than most people expect. He looked at Sierra Vista Estates and saw a project. He didn't see a community of people with history on their land, with documents in a county vault, with water rights recorded 60 years before he arrived.
He didn't know what he didn't know. That's a different kind of mistake than malice, and it carries a different lesson. The lesson isn't that HOAs are always wrong, or that neighbors are always enemies. The lesson is that land has a history whether you know it or not. And if you're going to make decisions about it, you owe it to yourself and everyone connected to it to understand what you're touching. Every pipe runs somewhere. Every document in that limestone courthouse was recorded for a reason.
Every system has a source. On clear mornings, I walk the property before Linda gets up, when frost still lies on the east-facing slopes and my breath makes small clouds in the cold air, and the pump house sits solid and functional at the corner of my property. The monitoring light on the control panel, a steady green. I walk it slowly. 4.3 acres in Madera County. The Sierra Nevada on the horizon, the same mountains Chester Woodbridge looked at in 1962, the same mountains my father looked at across the valley floor from the fields where he worked. Some things change completely. Some things don't change at all. So let me ask you this: if you owned land, would you wait for a crisis to learn its history? Because I'll tell you from experience, it's better to find it yourself than to have someone else find it for you.